Good morning. I think this is the first time for a long time I've served at a bar, but it's a bit early to distribute drinks, so I'll have to talk instead. It's a great pleasure to be here. I don't like name dropping. It's a bad habit. But the last public presentation I did was what I thought was a hoax. I was invited by the Bilderberg group. I don't know if any of you know of this, but it's a far-right group as far as I'm concerned, of people in the elite, and people like me don't get invited to things like that. But suddenly I found myself giving an hour-long presentation on the precariat and basic income with, instead of you sitting there, Henry Kissinger, instead of you sitting there, Christine Lagarde, instead of you sitting there, Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, and sundry prime ministers and people like that. Well, when they were introducing me, I was smiling. Someone afterwards said, "Why were you smiling?" Well, I said I thought it was a very strange situation to be in, to be talking about the precariat in such circumstances. Now, we are in the midst of a global transformation. Those of you who are familiar with Karl Polanyi's great transformation will know that that was about the painful construction of national market systems, which had a disembedded phase dominated by financial capital, and then a re-embedded phase when the reactions took place against the excesses and the insecurities and the inequalities that resulted from that disembedded phase. Polanyi's great transformation collapsed in the 1970s, and in the 1980s, the global transformation began, and we are in the middle of it, the painful construction of a global market system. And in the process, of course, we've seen a liberalization of markets, a commodification of everything that can be commodified, a privatization of everything that can be privatized, a pursuit of flexible labor markets, which imparts more and more insecurity to people. And we've seen the emergence, and this is the theme in the new book, of what I describe as the most unfree market system ever created. It's extraordinary, because it's been done in the name of free markets. The paradox is ridiculous. And what we've seen is that more and more of the money, the incomes, are going to rentiers, to people who are getting returns from property, from assets, financial or physical or natural. It's an irony of the age that Keynes, who had predicted the euthanasia of the rentiers, have actually seen an expansion to the point where they're ruling the world. And we have a new regulatory architecture that has been constructed in the last 30 years, at the top of which is the intellectual property rights regime. You couldn't have imagined it 100 years ago. But we have WIPO, which used to be a joke organization. WIPO means the World Intellectual Property Organization. And under that, millions of patents, millions and millions of copyrights, millions of brand names have been established, all and every one of them guaranteeing monopoly incomes to the possessors. Now you have a tripling of patents. Every single patent guarantees the owner of a patent 20 years of monopoly income. You can't use it. They make monopoly income, rents. They're worth probably 20% of global GDP, global national income. It's huge. This isn't a free market. This is a boondoggle. Now, in the process, governments have been shifting public expenditure more and more to giving subsidies to capital. Subsidies to the rentiers to attract them to their country or to keep them in their country, or to reward them for favors they've done politically. The growth of subsidies paid by government has been draining public expenditures and obliging governments to cut benefits and services to you and me. You can document that with relative ease. And what we've seen is a collapse of the 20th century income distribution system as such. It used to be, for most of the 20th century, at least after the Second World War, that there was a rough bargain that the share of national income going to capital and the share going to labor were roughly stable. It was a part of a social bargain. That's broken down. Everywhere in the world, the share going to capital has been going up, and the share of that going to rent has been shooting up, where the share going to labor has been shooting down. It's a global phenomenon. So the functional income distribution has got profoundly worse and will not be reversed. In addition, the old economics 101 rules of the labor market have broken down. It used to be when productivity went up, wages went up. No longer. You see the jaws of the snake opening in country after country. At the same time, you see that when employment goes up, it used to be the case that wages went up. Now, in country after country, when employment goes up, average wages go down. Simply because the new jobs are paying lower wages than the jobs that were disappearing. So the average goes down. The same with profits. It used to be when profits went up, workers gained something. It's no longer the case. You could go on. We have a situation in which, in the last 30 years, the global labor supply, the number of people participating in a labor market across the world, has quadrupled. What that means is that an extra 2 billion people are part of a globalizing labor market. All of those extra 2 billion were habituated and resigned to take a standard of living 1/50th of what a Swedish or a British or an American worker would have regarded as the norm. Now, you don't have to have a PhD in economics to realize you will have huge downward pressure on real wages in those circumstances. And that's precisely what has happened. So, of course, part of the outcomes of this situation is that debt, distressed debt, has become the hallmark of our age. Never before has debt been a systematic aspect of exploitation, a source of rental income being sucked out of the group I'm about to talk about. It is now, it's systemic. Financial institutions don't want to get rid of debt. On the contrary, as I quote some number of the top people, they want as much debt as possible, because that is an income earning stream for them. You don't have to be a genius to work that out. So we have a system which is generating mechanisms to increase debt of you and me. That's the reality. Now, the real story is that the outcome of this process is a global class fragmentation. At the top, you have a plutocratic corporations and a plutocracy, mainly rentiers, disgusting human beings that stride the globe. You know their names and you wish you didn't. Underneath them is an elite also serving the plutocracy and earning vast incomes in their palatial lifestyle, smug, claiming they are meritocratic. Then a salariat, a shrinking number of people with long-term employment security, pensions, paid holidays, more paid holidays, more paid holidays, and more paid holidays. Underneath that, you have the old proletariat, for which the welfare states of all our West European countries were built. It's shrinking everywhere, in every part of the globe. It's below them that the precariat has emerged. And below the precariat, in every city and every town, is a lumpen precariat, an underclass. People dying prematurely in the streets, a badge of shame on all of us. But the precariat is not an underclass. The precariat is wanted by global capitalism. It consists of people who have three dimensions. First, they are being habituated to accept a life of unstable labor, insecure labor. This is the least important aspect. Many of us actually wouldn't mind unstable labor, moving between jobs. Why would you want to be a barrister, this type of barrister, for 30 years? You know, there is not a virtue in wanting to be in the same bloody job for years after years. But in the circumstances in which people are placed, it's terrible. But in addition to this unstable labor, people in the precariat have to do a lot of work for labor, work for the state that doesn't get recognized, doesn't get remunerated, but they have to do it. Networking, retraining, blah, 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 blah. You can document that, except that our official statistics ignore all that type of work. In addition, the precariat has no occupational identity, no occupational narrative to give to their lives. I am becoming something. I am something. And in retirement, I can tell my grandchildren, I was something. If you're in the precariat, you can't do that. The next aspect is that if you're in the precariat, you have to rely almost entirely on money wages. Money wages that are declining, that are stagnant, and increasingly volatile. So you cannot even count on them next week or next month, let alone next year. This volatility means that people in the precariat are always in uncertainty, facing a situation of unsustainable debt. I have a man climbing on a razorblade. Seemed to symbolize. It was done by a Polish friend, and it got my imagination because that is what you're like if you're in the precariat. One mistake, one illness, one accident, one ill judgment, and none of us, of course, make any of those, and you plunge. Those circumstances go with increasing poverty traps, where the means-tested benefit system that's developing means that for millions of Europeans today, going from low benefits into the low-wage jobs that you can get means you face a marginal tax rate of 80%, 90%. The head of Keller in Finland recently told me, Guy, often over 100% here. The third aspect of the precariat is actually most important of all. This is the first mass group in history which is systematically losing every type of right, civil rights, cultural rights, economic rights, social rights, political rights. And it is this that defines the precariat, not those other features. Because ultimately, if you're in the precariat, you are a supplicant. A supplicant who has to beg. I hope I haven't offended him. But in doing so, you have to ask for favors, ask for things from the state, authority figures, or whatever. Now, the precariat is a dangerous class today because it rejects the old political strategies and because it is split, almost at war with itself. It consists of atavists, part of the precariat, of people falling out of old working class communities and families, who are falling out and they look backwards and they say, we had something better, but we don't have it today. And in those circumstances, those atavists are looking to populist politicians and political parties. Today, their favorite son is Donald Trump. Next year it will be Marine Le Pen in France. We have it with Brexit, we have it with Orban, we have it with your Sweden Democrats. Apologies if anybody is in that wonderful movement. We have it everywhere. This populist threat is why I think I was invited to the Bilderberg group, not because of my face. Because they're getting worried, the elite. But that populist threat is a threat to everybody, not just to us. The second group in the precariat consists of what I call nostalgics. These are the migrants, the ethnic minorities, the refugees, who don't have a present. They don't have a home. And this group is being dispossessed and maltreated and turned into villains as well as victims. It's crazy, but that's what's happening. The third group is the progressives. These are people who go to university, go to college. They were promised a future. They were promised that they would have a career, wonderful life, rapidly rising incomes, a pension, all the trappings of a bourgeois existence. And they come out of university knowing they bought a lottery ticket that's worth less and less and costs more and more. I don't need to tell Swedes about student debt because your student debt is almost as high as anywhere else in the world, despite having a more commercialized system elsewhere. So we have a situation now where there's a political crisis, but the progressive part of the precariat does not yet have a political strategy. But we're getting to a stage where that part of the precariat is growing and growing, and the energies out there are fantastic, and the creativity and people's responses are growing. New movements are taking shape. New political parties are taking shape. All of these new parties will be partially good, partially bad. Live in Italy and you know what Beppe Grillo stands for. Go to Spain and you see Podemos losing its nerve. Going to Denmark, you see, well, Alternativet, Go to Poland, Razem, similarly. But you can tell there's an energy out there that is moving the debate forward. I think we are in a stage of revolt, where we want to revolt, but we're not sure how to revolt. We're in the stage of primitive rebels. We know what we're against, but we're not quite sure what we're for. I think we are going to see a revolt in which we build and demand a new income distribution system. A system which recognizes that technology is changing the nature of the labor process, creating crowd labor and a globalized system by which there will be many, many, many more jobs, but those jobs will not pay people enough to live in dignity. In those circumstances, I think we're going to see a demand that we redistribute this rental income, which is amoral, economically unjustified by any economist, and redistribute it to make sure that the whole of society has access to the rental income and recovers the commons, which is being denuded, sold off to the property owners. And that new income distribution system is going to have capital funds. I first worked in Sweden with the great Rudolf Meidner back in the 80s. And Rudolf had his wage earner funds. It was attacked by the LO and attacked by the employers, attacked by most people. But the essence of what he wanted was a capital fund to be able to distribute the proceeds of society. We're seeing the emergence of movements for sovereign wealth funds, which could be the means, as it had in Norway and Alaska and so on, for pooling part of the rental income, not just from oil and things like that, to be able to pay out towards a basic income. A basic income which would give the core, the anchor of a new income distribution system. In that process, we have to defeat those reactionaries who say it's unaffordable. It's not unaffordable. We could replace the subsidies. We could make sure we share in the rent. We could build up a better tax system so that the ordinary people are not paying much higher taxes. It's well within the reach of affordability. We must also defeat those who say that if people have a basic income, they will stop working. Well, our pilots have shown that people who have basic income work more, not less. They do more work, like caring, like working in the community. They do more secondary activities that build up their security and their humanity. It is not true that if you or I had just the modest basic income, we'd all become lazy drifters. We're human beings. We want to improve life, not stay still. And the ultimate thing is that a basic income is a matter of social justice. We go back to Thomas Paine, who recognized that nature belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to the rentiers by themselves. It isn't something for nothing we're demanding. It's something for justice. And it is something, too, that would increase our freedom. Because without our freedom, we will not be productive citizens of a good society. Security, freedom, social justice. These are the three avenues to justify a basic income. It isn't a panacea. It has to be seen as part of a strategy. But it is an important part. I'd like to end on that note, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much.